welcome to Networks of Your Life. Networks of Your Life is a new podcast series engaging with creative technologists, particularly those working with node-based systems. During our conversations, we're going to take a deep dive into their creative practice, looking behind the scenes of projects past, present, and future, thinking of these networks as a snapshot of time, ideation as a form of digital journaling. Each episode's going to focus on three networks from guests' portfolios. And we're going to start off by focusing on early embryonic works where they're newly discovering and carving a way into their tools before moving into current practice, spotlighting projects that they are particularly proud of technically, aesthetically, as well as conceptually. The podcast will end finishing on ideas and explorations that are going to drive them into future projects and goals. My first guest is Andy Hurst. On Instagram and other social media, he's known as Quarter Inch Jack. And many of you are going to know him from his prolific and always extremely high quality output of beautiful TouchDesigner projects. Before we start, a little background on Andy. Andy started out as a lighting and sound engineer for live events, mostly in theatre, before moving on to write comedy for BBC Radio 4. Moving into education full-time in 2007, now lecturing in Kent, UK as a university lecturer. He runs theatre and performance degree courses on which he teaches technical production and digital performance. His research focuses on interactivity with digital systems for live performance, and he'll be delivering his first TouchDesigner classes next year as a media production degree, which is super, super exciting. And they've done lots of development in Kent as well for making a really big immersive production space. I first came across Andy's work in 2025 and was immediately impressed by the depth and technical skill conveyed in his projects, and even more impressed when I learned that he'd only very recently started using TouchDesigner. Without further ado, welcome Andy.
Thanks, Dan. It's great to be here with you on this first episode, I guess, of the series. Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, and I think you're sort of a great first guest because there's so much breadth of your work, and it's also this period that's relatively condensed because you've been using Touch Designer for about 2 years.
Maybe even a little bit less. I mean, what this has enabled me to do is kind of go back and look at the history of what I've been doing in my relationship with Touch Designer, if you like, and really start and really have a look at where I've come from. So I suppose if anyone looks at my Instagram page, it's basically a scrapbook of everything I've done in Touch Designer, the good, the bad, and the ugly. You know, very much so. I've been tempted to remove stuff, but then I've stopped myself from doing that because it is really just a kind of a tale of what I've done. So the very first post on Instagram is less than a year ago. So it was on the
Wow.
4th of July last year. And I think I'd been attempting to learn Touch Designer in a kind of meaningful and focused way for about 6 months before that. So I reckon I'm about the 18-month stage with Touch Designer. But as you say, I kind of had experience with node-based programming. Before then, I used a piece of software called Isadora, which works in a very similar way to Touch Designer. I think Touch Designer allows for much more freedom, to create visuals. So uh, I I needed to start to learn how to use it because, as you've mentioned, I'm going to start teaching it next year for my job. So I needed to get pretty kind of confident with it relatively quickly.
Hmm.
So I've had to
Yeah.
do that. I didn't have any choice.
It's funny,
Yeah.
I've met a lot of people, particularly those in theatre, whose pipeline to using Touch has been Isadora, because I think
Yeah.
that's primarily theatre used, right?
It is. The guy that kind of brainchild, the guy that wrote it is a guy called Mark Caniglio, and he's a programmer, of course, he's a computer
Hmm.
programmer, but he's also artistic director of a contemporary dance theatre in the States called Troika Ranch. The company that makes Isadora is called Troikatronics. So he built that piece of software himself as a tool because he was frustrated that he couldn't do the kind of types of digital performance work with his dance company that he wanted to be able to do. So he built his own tool and then kind of released it to the world, which was great. And that was my introduction really to node-based programming through Isadora. Yeah. So hats off to Mark Caniglia.
That's amazing. And that's one of the things that's been amazing about seeing Touch kind of exploding in the last couple of years is seeing all the community built projects and all the different pipelines. I know that you're sort of a dabbler in lots of different kind of network systems like PopX and things like that.
I mean, it's like being a kid in a sweet shop at the moment, I have to say. We all know the kind of people, the incredible sort of creatives and content creators and developers in our community. We know who they are. They're producing some incredible tools. And it's almost like, now I need to try this. Now I need to go over there and play with this. And there's not enough time. I mean, in some ways, I have to physically stop myself from just constantly going to those tools, because I still regard myself as really still getting to grips with the basics. And I don't want to skip that step, if you see what I mean. The tools are so powerful. They offer
Hmm.
so much creative possibility, that it's really tempting to always go to those. And I feel like I'd be missing out on getting a really good grounding, especially because I've got to teach it. So it's no
Yeah.
good being able to, for me to be able to produce these amazing things with all of these fantastic tools that are being created. But I've got to be able to teach people the fundamentals. So I've got to ground myself in that until I'm really, really confident, satisfied that I can,
Hmm.
before I can fully start using those as a constant thing.
I saw you've been doing, and this is maybe a good segue into looking at your first network, but I've been seeing you've been looking back at sort of top workflows recently and kind of getting back into textures, which is really cool, kind of the Paqueta 12 kind of stuff, um, which tops are so powerful, and I think now with pops, often people, myself included, kind of go straight to pops, but there's a lot that you can do with tops. So it's kind of exciting to see that you've been kind of getting back into that type of workflow as well.
Well, you say getting back into that kind of workflow, but I guess this is the weirdness of when I started with TouchDesigner, because actually the pre-release, the pre-official release of TouchDesigner that released Pops was available for quite a few months before that. And so I had that pre-release. So only because I'd been sort of dabbling with tops and then Pops came out, I immediately went to Pops, and that's where I've been. Really, that's where I've learned TouchDesigner, in Pops. So you say going back to Tops, but actually, what I'm trying to do is uncover the power of Tops for the first time, and it's such a completely different way of working.
Hmm.
Um, you know, all of a sudden I'll think, oh, it's okay, I can just build an attribute there in Top. Oh no, I can't.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. That's a
So
channel. That's a pixel.
exactly,
Yeah.
so it's a completely different way of working, but thanks to you, and others who are offering like Package 12, like you've been saying, there are some fantastic tutorials out there for people to dig into and really start to get to grips with how you can view image as a data holding mechanism, which is effectively what we're doing with tops. And
Hmm.
but unprogramming my TouchDesigner brain away from pops and then focusing on tops has been a challenge. I
Totally.
think
Yeah. Yeah.
probably.
They're very different workflows, so I can see why that
Yeah,
might
yeah,
happen.
yeah.
But shall we jump into your first network of the day?
This is the kind of one that I chose, not because it's a masterpiece by any stretch of the imagination. And as I look at it now, there are bits about it that make me cringe, and certainly things that I would tidy up and do differently. Um, as you can see, I started getting into camera movement at this point.
Hmm.
Can't remember exactly when this was made, but it might have been September last year or something like that, I think. Um, and what I do find interesting is that at this point, it's clear that I'm starting to get interested in sort of glassy textures and translucency and that kind of thing, which I'm still on. I'm still really interested in that. And if anyone has seen stuff that I've done over the past few weeks, then they'll see that's been something that I've been really interested in and exploring and experimenting with. This was one of the first times that I really sort of got to grips with PBR materials and translucency and started using, I don't think it's, I can't remember if it's an environment light or not. It might be a Fong or something. Oh no, it's PBR. Starting to uncover the sort of power that you can develop when using those types of things in a render pipeline. So that's
Hmm.
why I find it interesting. There's far too much bloom on it. There's far too much blur. I can see if we have a look at the network down here, I don't know how you want to approach the network, but there's a feedback edge from the palette in there, and there's a bloom, and there's probably another bloom somewhere. So it was at that stage where maybe I was not overly happy with the final result, and I thought that's all right. I'll just stick a load of bloom on it, and I'll stick a load of blur on it, and it'll be brilliant. And actually, what happens? It just makes a kind of overly luminant mess.
Well, let's zoom out and look at the whole network, because I think what this shows really well is, you know, and how I think about networks is you have all these stages, right? And I think the thing I tend to gravitate towards the most, which I think this is why I'm sort of really interested in your work, because your work is so, you have such a polish to a lot of your renders. I really get kind of hooked on that first section right before we go into the geometry, into the render and working in those pipelines. But what I think is a really good example here is that the visual, if you actually to break down the core of that visual, it's quite complex, but you've managed to get that effect from relatively few. I see, a chop, I think a pattern chop going in there and a couple of pops that are kind of processing that. But let's maybe go into that just first section and kind of talk step by step about what's happening through that.
Yeah, yeah. So you're absolutely right. So you can see the pattern chop that I've got creating the initial kind of data flow. When I loaded this up again, after all this time, I was getting about 20 frames a second, and I was going, "Why? This should not be running so slowly," And so I was looking at the pattern shop, and it was, I've got quite a lot going on in terms of length, and there were various other bits and pieces that were causing it to run slow. So I was able to kind of optimize it a little bit. It's still only running at about kind of 40 frames a second, so there's probably a lot more I could do to get it to run more smoothly. But yeah, basic pattern chop going there into a chop to pop, creating the wavy line, you
Hmm.
know. And I promised myself I wouldn't do too much to the network before showing it, as it was supposed to be a snapshot where I was at the time. I did put a line metrics and a line resample in here to aid the skinning of these little kind of glass tubes that we've got going on. So it's really simple, just in terms of creating a wavy line that will then be instanced using the copy pop into a kind of a tube that we've got
Hmm.
going on there. And I remember for a long time at this point having real difficulties in orienting the circles, and kind of gradually understanding over a period of time, the attribute that we could use to get the kind of direction of the circles to follow the kind of line
Hmm.
here, using the kind of attributes that are created by the line metrics pop there, the direction next and the direction previous,
Hmm.
and that kind of thing. And then I think it was Sav that kind of came up with a nice tutorial on YouTube about skinning geometry, and then how you had to associate the group of primitives that you're working with the number of points that you had in the line resample, the divisions that you had in the line resample,
Hmm.
So I was able to kind of update it a little bit using that technique, because I hadn't used it when I first did this. No, this is interesting that the normal that we've got here, because I had before Touch Designer, I hadn't really worked with sort of geometry and lighting.
Hmm.
The stuff that I'd done with Isadora uh, didn't really include the way light interacts with 3D geometry at the level that Touch Designer does. So I had no experience of what a normal was. or how what you needed to do with a normal and that kind of thing. So clearly, I'd started to get to grips with creating normals after a piece of geometry to kind of get the lighting to work well with it. Um, and it was only actually quite later on that I found that with the normal pop, then having to create tangents so that you could use things like normal maps. I haven't used it
Hmm.
here, but normal maps within a PBR material. You had to create these tangents, and that was all very much a learning curve for me. I was working with, I almost started backwards, like you were saying. I
Hmm.
almost started with the render network first, with a PBR material in and environment lighting and all that kind of stuff. And then I'd build the geometry to that. And so you can see here that it's kind of masked, it's completely masked the fact that these tubes are all flat. Like you say, they do seem to have some kind of volume to them. So,
Yeah,
still learning.
totally. I mean, I think that's a really interesting point, and the ways of working within software and node-based networks. There's so many ways of approaching the building of something, and I
Mm.
have only really just thought of this, but I'm sure that your background in lighting and theater probably is really impactful to how you think about, the scenography of this stuff. And I think that's something that kind of shines through in a lot of the projects that you share, is that there's always this kind of sense of like cinematography or kind of scene building in terms of the resulting visual.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and the lighting as well.
Hmm.
The angles of the lighting, I really kind of spend ages messing about with that kind of thing. But you're absolutely right. Is that if we look at this one here, it's an object that is sort of floating around in a void,
Hmm.
and that's fine. And we see loads of brilliant touch designer stuff that is working with particles and kind of glitch aesthetic. And it exists within this kind of void space, and it's completely appropriate for what people are trying to do. Um, and you're absolutely right. Can't remember exactly when, but at some point, I decided to start grounding the things that I was working with in a defined space. And actually, it was because I remember why. It's because I was really keen on working with shadows.
Mm.
So that I loved the fact that you could get the geometry there, and what you were the main kind of focus of the piece, and it would then cast a shadow, and the
Hmm.
depth. All of a sudden, things started jumping out the screen at me, and I found that quite addictive.
Hmm.
So most times there'll be a foreground and a background in the stuff that I'm doing.
So this is your second network, which is kind of highlighting something that you're excited by in terms of kind of aesthetic and technical exploration.
I guess this was probably the first network where just got some lovely comments from people, and that was affirming, I guess, of course, you know. Um, but I was really happy with this only because it was so different to what I was seeing other touch designer users creating. I've mentioned the kind of the fantastic particle stuff that's going on, the audio reactive stuff, and the glitch visuals that were happening. And I was absolutely um, mesmerized by some of those, and spent a lot of time trying to emulate those and trying to build those kind of systems as a way of
Hmm.
learning, of course. Um, but I think I was really happy with this one because it looked so completely different to many of the things that I'd seen,
Hmm.
really. And it started me down a bit of a road, um, exploring sort of organic textures. So deliberately moving away from particle systems and working with that kind of thing to something a bit more solid. Actually, you used the word yourself, a bit more cinematic.
Hmm.
So looking at kind of a single object that's there in an environment. And I also remember, I think this was the time that I discovered Luma Blur as well,
Okay.
which enables you to kind of create this brilliant depth of field uh, in there, which adds to this notion of the kind of cinematic thing. I wasn't thinking this at the time. It's
I
only going
remember I
back.
remember seeing this on online, and it's sort of like the texture of it, it feels like super biological and almost like slimy and wet. Like there's a tactility to it in terms of it, how it's kind of coming out the screen to me.
Yeah, and that was the idea. I think I put on the Instagram post that I'd lent heavily into the organic, in this. And
Hmm.
I was also really happy with the kind of slight twitchiness of it. So I could have just had it just kind of wobbling about, just moving slowly, wobbling about. But every now
Hmm.
and again, there's this kind of slightly disturbing twitch that it does, which I was really happy with. And I think I'm right in thinking, yeah, on the PBR material, I think this is the first time that I'd kind of found this darkness emit option on the
Okay.
PBR material. If we turn that off, you get that,
Oh,
which
interesting.
is still nice and interesting.
Hmm.
And actually, I ummed and ahed a long time between, well, which one do I go with? Do I go
Hmm.
with this that's getting the color from I can't remember where now, but we'll find it, I'm sure. Or do I go with this, where a lot of the color is overridden by
Sure.
the color that's being emitted from the geometry? And I ended up with that one only because it looked more slimy.
It
It was
does look more
slightly
slimy. And it
less.
almost it kind of covers up some of the, I guess you can see more of the diffusion of the light over the texture there.
You
So
can,
the second one with the purple color kind
yeah,
of
and
blurs
but
that into something that is more slimy, as you say.
and that texture that you've got there is all done by the normal map with this
Hmm.
noise. And if I kind of do that, you can see that you can create it. You can create a much smoother kind of feel with that normal map, or
Hmm.
you can create that really textured thing. But what's nice, I think, with the color emit is that it still maintains a little bit of that texture as well. So it's not completely smooth. Like an organic substance wouldn't be completely smooth. So I've kept that little bit of texture there.
When you
Go
flip it
on.
around to the black and smooth it out a little bit with the noise, it almost looks like do you know ferrofluid, like magnetic fluid?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I see what you mean. So like, like that kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah. That's really cool.
Yeah. And again, this was just discovering the power of these kind of post-processing tools,
Hmm.
um, that really kind of captured my imagination, I suppose, which I've kind of stuck with really now. But it has its roots in a kind of very familiar technique. I think you'll be very familiar with a kind of basic feedback top displacement network.
Hmm.
A couple of noises being fed into a displace, in a feedback loop there, comped together, and then a little bit of processing, kind of image processing here. And it's quite interesting to kind of just disable some of these. So if you can see, I've disabled the edge, and all of a sudden you start to lose the sort of definition that we're getting in the final product. We put the edge back on. You can switch out those so you can see that you just make choices, don't you, about
Hmm.
about where you want to go.
Totally, yeah.
That one's just as valid if you want to go that way, but I liked the kind of definition in there. And the same with the
Yeah.
blur. Way,
Oh, that's
the blur's
cool.
doing an awful lot of work, isn't it? An awful lot
The
of work
blur the
there.
blur does a lot in those feedback networks. I'd love to see the output of that null at the end of the top chain.
So just what that's doing.
Yeah, okay, cool. So that's the texture that kind of feeds everything in that
So
second
that's
layer.
yeah, that's all the movement. Yeah, and
Hmm.
and you'll notice that I've combined that with a circle ramp,
Hmm.
at which you can see is defining the edge of the kind of purple things. What are they? I don't know.
To me it looks like a
But
cross between a
yeah,
heart and some guts. It's very, very
yeah, lovely,
fleshy.
isn't it? Yeah, lovely. I mean, that looks very much like a petri dish to me,
Yeah.
with the kind of bacteria inside a petri dish there. So that's what that little top network's doing is just creating that texture, which is then transferred into height,
Hmm.
as you would expect, onto a single plane. So there's my plane, you know, they're adding a texture map so that I can get that kind of texture hooked up correctly onto the plane. And then, it's the transform here that is doing that bit of work. You can see, you'll be able to see it better with the
Hmm.
normals. Where's the normal? It's all the way down here. But there's what the height map is doing to the kind of plane, as you can see.
Hmm.
So when you're looking at it head on, I suppose if you're looking at the side, you can see it's got much more kind of
It's
height than
yeah,
perhaps
it's really I guess that's what as
you kind of
well that
imagine.
aids your post-processing that depth of field effect, having it so
Yeah,
high.
yeah, yeah, definitely.
That's great.
So if we go back to just go back to there, so the there's the color, and actually the color's not doing an awful lot because
Hmm.
um, the emit is doing it. So I'd put that color
Sure.
in before I did the emit and kept it in. But if you get rid of the emit, you can kind of make some really nice kind of color changes just by using that the color ramp that we've got here.
Hmm.
So if I just alter this, you can start to see that you can. That's where the color is. It's still kind of visible
Hmm.
through the emit, so it does make a very subtle difference having it there. Um, and then, yeah, you've got the noise there, which is giving it a bit more movement. These chops here, these are where I'm getting that kind of little twitch thing
Okay.
from. So you can see that the noise chop that's going on here is feeding this transform. So there's a little bit of movement, rotation, a little bit of kind of Z translate, backwards and forwards, and
Hmm.
that's where you're getting the kind of twitchy stuff that's going on there, just with those noise chops. And then it's all about the post processing, really. I find that SSAO is really important to a lot of the stuff that I do, even though it's just a complete hog, cycle
Sure.
hog. So if we get rid of that, you can
Wow.
see that you lose a
Massive
lot of the kind of
difference.
definition, a lot of the different definition in between the little organic strands. That's where you're losing it with the SSAOs there,
Hmm.
And I think I got a little bit more restrained with my bloom, and not a feedback smudge in sight. So I'd learned by then. So yeah, I was really happy with this one. It just kind of I really started to get to grips with PBR materials, kind of normal mapping, the power of what they could do there, but also this kind of love of creating top textures that could be then mapped onto pop geometry using a height map. You know,
Hmm. It's a really
yeah,
sort of modular approach, and I think that's one of the things I've always loved about Touch Designer as a tool is how easy it is to take, chop or top or any kind of data and move that into a different family and then work with that.
yeah. You say easy. That was the most confusing thing in the world when I first started
At the beginning,
started off, and
yeah.
I still struggle. Now I still struggle getting the data backwards and forwards into different families.
I think conceptually, as you start using the tool, it is challenging because I don't think a lot of tools work that way. Like I don't know about Isadora, but I used Max MSP a lot. And
Yeah,
to convert, say from, if I want to take something from audio signal domain into visual jitter domain, you have to do a couple of transformations there, and it's not super hard, but it's not
yeah,
sort of as easy as TD where I can just take a node and kind of drag out to a chop or a pop, and it then just copies that data.
yeah, yeah. I'm coming from very much a practical live performance based background, dealing with lighting rigs and mixing desks, that kind of thing. So the whole kind of journey, and really using Isadora, I wasn't really using that either to
Hmm.
this extent. So Touch Designer really was a wake up call, and a learning curve for that, just in terms of handling data. Yeah,
I mean, I think that's a lot of times when people are learning tools, I found this for myself as well. Maybe not being a specialist in, say, math or 3D is an asset in a lot of ways because you figure it out in your own way, and that means you have your own sort of signature and aesthetic, which I think is really interesting to see.
quite possibly. And I'm sure that any kind of signature aesthetic I've got is through a process of random experimentation that I found worked, and therefore I kept doing it.
Sure. Yeah, well, this is a beautiful one. And I remember seeing this pop up in my feed, a number of months ago, and it's a really great one to get to look at deeper. So this is your third and final network that you've brought for us today.
Yeah, so it's a relatively recent one, I
Okay.
think. Uh, 2, 3 weeks or something like that.
Hmm.
And you can see I'm still interested in materials. Um, and I suppose if the first net that we looked at was my very first starting point to try and understand translucency, glass textures, that kind of thing, then I suppose this is where I'm at now. And look, they're actual tubes; they're not flat. So I managed to get
Progress.
that right for this one. you know. Um, so I was really happy with this. And again, it's not a massively complicated network, really. It's using pretty similar concept to the first network.
Hmm.
So I suppose it's a nice bookend, really. I haven't used the chop to create the wiggly line. I've used a pattern pop straight into a copy pop to make the basic geometry there. So the animation is coming from the original phase movement of the pattern, copied then using the copy pop. It maintains that kind of movement out from the center. This kind of nice, slow, languid movement, which I was looking for. Again, then just digging out all of the various attributes that we need from the line metrics pop to enable us to convert this into a 3D tube. So
Hmm.
distance start norm, end norm, and the direction next, direction previous, that kind of thing. Resampling that line, quite a lot of divisions to get smooth in there, 700 divisions or so.
Okay.
And then I've made a point scale as well, just by multiplying the distance end norm, distance start norm, and then multiplying that by 4, which kind of gives us a scaling attribute then to create the point scale for um, the tubes.
Hmm.
Um, and so we're passing all of that then as basically instancing data into a copy, which is taking our circles and then copying them into the tube geometry that we've got there. And you can see that I've got the vectors kind of highlighted there in color
Hmm.
because I used that a little bit later on actually to make the tubes a little bit fatter,
Okay.
just by multiplying the points by the kind of vector direction or adding it together. Um, and I'll kind of explain why I did that in a second. And then the standard skinning method that we've already mentioned. And the texture map, again, there's not a huge amount, but you can see that when you look at the kind of glass tubes, the sort of reflection, the thing that looks like the reflection is moving itself. And then, so I was able to use the texture map to kind of, get that sort of bit of movement. Is it that one? It might not be that one, actually. It's that one. So I
Hmm.
needed to use the text attribute, which I'm then rotating.
Okay.
So any texture that I apply using the PBR material can then sort of shift around, and so that's what's giving the sort of reflections a bit of animation there and a bit of movement. So that's what's going on. So up to that point, you've got the basic geometry there, which is again, it goes back to the original composition that I've made. Was now I was working with geometry as a focal point rather than the fully rendered thing as a
Hmm.
focal point from the start. I was really keen to get the geometry correct, and you can see that the kind of tubes tail off, and that's why I was using the point scale. So they
Okay.
go down to a very very thin at this kind of inception point here, and then tail off towards the end. Of course, you can't see that end of the tube
Sure.
in the final output, but you can see how they kind of come to a point in the middle there.
Hmm.
Um, so it splits off at that point, and we're now plugging into array, which again I'm starting to uncover is such a useful hop
Hmm.
because what I wanted to do was find a mechanism of creating all of these little spherical particles that would stay within the tube. They would move within the tube, they'd stay within the tube. And of course, now, you've got so many add-on tools, Mini UV, Joseph Peltz, just making all of these incredible tools that enable us to kind of cluster particles within a geometry, and they'll stay anchored within that geometry. But again, I was determined to try and do this in vanilla TD,
Hmm.
So I came up with this idea that if I placed the original kind of lines that were creating the 3D geometry, and I placed that line within the tubes as collision geometry, then I'd get this kind of little lines that were kind of being fired off, and they'd be stopping,
Mm.
um, at the edges of the boundary of the tubes. And from that point, I could reduce all of those lines to get the kind of particles. So there's a line resample there. So that's converting all of those lines into points,
Hmm.
which I've got there. And then I'm taking a random, what's this random doing? Point scale again. So random point scale.
Okay.
So we get different size spheres. And then random color. So we're getting all the color. And then that is passed on to Joseph Peltz's spheres tool
Okay.
that's available on Patreon, which is great. I guess I could have just used a standard sphere pop and altered that, but I think I wouldn't have been able to get the FPS. It's around 45 at the moment. If I'd used this many
Okay.
spheres with that, I don't know how it affected the FPS. So I went with that great little tool that he's offering there. So that was that. So it was a nice way of keeping all of those spheres contained really firmly within the tube. There's a little bit of randomness to where they're positioned, and they're all moving, towards the middle of the kind of the structure there. So I was happy with the way that worked. It was nice. Um, and then again, we're going on to the sort of final render of this. There's a background, which is almost, you don't really notice it, or I don't really
Hmm.
notice it. But if you focus on the background, you'll notice it's just not a black void, like I've mentioned before. It's kind of situated in some kind of moving space there,
Hmm.
that's just highlighted there with a plane, and again, some texture created by a noise, and a normal map that we've got there. That's what's creating these little animated light bits and pieces going on there. Um, and then everything's passed through to render. And I tend now to always use a load of render passes. It took me ages, ages and ages and ages to work out why my translucency wasn't working properly.
Hmm.
While I could see within a structure, but I couldn't see beyond the structure. And it was all to do with the order of the render passes, with the translucent material always at the end of the kind of render pass link.
Hmm.
So that's the glass structure at the end there, and
Okay.
everything's kind of
Kind of
within
within
that
there.
glass structure through it. Yeah, and through it, to the back,
I
which is why the kind of little light movement plane is just before it in the render structure, so you can see that behind. You can see it through the glass.
I think I remember you mentioning this at the Touch Designer meetup in London. Is this sort
Yeah,
of before or after that event that you created this one?
really good question. I'd have to look at my Instagram
That's
page.
okay. It's beautiful.
I
It's
can't
giving
remember.
a sort of psychedelic phosphorescent jellyfish, but also kind of like almost like an arcade, like pinball kind of vibe, kind of like colliding those
Yeah,
two together.
yeah. Yeah, I just like the feel of it, and it kind of scratched the translucent itch that I had, that I've
Hmm.
still got. Uh, you know, and people are going to get bored of me producing little bubbles with things inside them. Can't stop doing it. Don't know why. You know, there you go. Um, yeah,
Very
and
cool.
again, not too much bloom. There's a bit on the spheres, but
Hmm.
that's what it is. Yeah,
Well, this
yeah.
is wonderful. Thank you for sharing these networks. What is next? What are you excited about for future builds and future
Well,
explorations?
Yeah, okay. So I've only really just discovered substance textures,
Okay.
substance texture tops. I think I did play around with them when I very, very first started off, but they didn't seem to do anything for me. And I go, what's this thing? I don't know how it works and all this. Now I've got a massive library of substance textures and I'm just going through them, and it just adds a whole new level. Again, it's all about the kind of texture and the render network for me, and they're adding just another level of stuff to kind of my creative toolkit, really. And again, a couple of the most recent compositions that are on the Instagram page, you can see me experimenting with substance textures. So I'm
Mhm.
loving them. And what's great about substance textures is that I got annoyed with it because I couldn't animate the substance easily. Because if you
Mhm.
actually try to alter the actual substance attributes itself on the top, the kind of different parameters, it takes ages to load. So you can't do it on the fly, which goes back to me playing around with the texture tool, the texture attribute that I mentioned
Mhm.
just earlier, getting these little kind of animated, I guess, glass caustics, for want of a better word. You can animate the texture that the texture is applied to. That makes sense?
Mhm.
And that will give you the freedom to animate that substance, which
Okay.
I did a piece a couple of a week ago or something like that. Does exactly that, and that was a kind of
Mhm.
a whole new revelation for me. So I'll probably just do that loads now. I'll get fed up of that as well.
That's great though. I
That's
always think
Australia.
about building stuff as almost like when I work at least I think about it like kind of improvising, and it's like when I kind of teach
Yeah,
I always think about it's not about showing people how to do everything, it's about showing people how to find the little tricks and techniques that really work for them, and then they can kind of improvise and be excited around that, and then maybe from that they'll develop the next idea as they kind of play
yeah.
within that system.
I mean, so much of what I still do now, less so because I think I'd like to think I'm slightly more focused and understanding of what I'm trying to do at the beginning of the network. But so much of my learning process has been happy accidents and
Hmm.
exploration and play. I'm plugging something in somewhere which maybe I didn't mean to do and going, oh, that looks good.
Hmm.
I wonder why it looks good, and then trying to work out why it looks good. And
Sure.
that's been a really good process for me.
This is awesome. Is there anything we can stop sharing the screen whenever you're ready? Is there anything else you want to sort of touch on?
Um, well, actually, just a really good opportunity for me to say thank you to all of the creatives and all of the community for being so generous with their knowledge, of Touch Designer. My Touch Designer journey very much started off with your tutorials on YouTube, and I was amazed at the amount of free knowledge that was being made available by the whole community, and I'm getting to the point now where people are asking me, do you have any suggestions about where I can go to start? And I
Hmm.
tell them, go and see Visual Code Poetry, go and see Dan Sapper, go and see Electronaut with his incredible, beginners series that he's got, and all the other, great content creators that are doing so much good work. It's all now moving to Patreon, of course, which is a slightly different environment, but there we go.
Hmm.
That's how it's going to grow. So it's still a good platform.
And you
But
have a
yeah,
Patreon
so
yourself?
yeah. I have a
Yes.
Patreon page, so you can find that Quarter Inch Jack on Patreon. There's a link on my Instagram page. Good
Brilliant.
advice.
Well, Andy, thank you so much for sharing your networks and your time today. I have really enjoyed
Thank
it.
you, Dan.
And yeah, looking forward to seeing much more work from you in future.